We know glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, is so disruptive to our gut. Antibiotics are so disruptive to our gut because they kill off the good bacteria as well as killing off the bad bacteria. But glyphosate actually only targets the beneficial bacteria. So they're even worse than antibiotics because they're only targeting the beneficial bacteria.
Welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm great, Jesse. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Really looking forward to getting into everything gut health, probiotics, prebiotics, how we can take great care of our gut health, which is so important on a foundational level. But to start off, let's talk about, from your perspective, how you got into this world. So when were you first turned on to gut health, and how did that entry progress to where you are today?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting journey because I started out in litigation. I was in a trial lawyer and I was in the legal world, and I just really wasn't enjoying that aspect of, my career, and I was working crazy hours, and I was started to have a family. And so I decided that I was going to leave the high stress litigation world and go into a family pharmaceutical business where I thought this was great. I'm going to be, delivering life-saving medications to people, making a difference in people's lives. And then after my husband and I were both in the industry together, and after being in the industry for a while, we started to really notice a lot of the abuses in the industry. We started to see the overprescribing of drugs. We started to see even some, a pharmaceutical rep came in one time talking about a drug that was, we had won this bid at this huge hospital system, and a pharmaceutical rep came in and said, "Oh, great job that we won this bid. Now my job is to go to every cardiologist in this hospital system and lower the number that they would prescribe this medication to." And so we were like, this is crazy. And my husband and I were shocked. But then at the same time, we were like, we saw this with our own relatives. We had an aunt who was on one pharmaceutical and then, for like a stomach issue, and then went on another one because that stomach, pharmaceutical started causing her joint pain. And then the joint pain, then she had a skin rash. It was like this never ending cycle of pharmaceuticals and never getting better. And so we just started to see that there were a lot of abuses in the industry. And we've always been more about natural remedies and always been about getting to the root cause of something. And that's where I think we started to see the pharmaceutical industry was kind of failing us. Nobody was focusing on the root cause or prevention. Everyone only seemed to be talking about treatment. And so we really, my husband and I read a lot of Wayne Dyer, a lot of Norman Vincent Peale, a lot of deep thinking authors that we have influenced our lives quite dramatically. And we knew we weren't doing our life's work. And so we wanted to get into a field that was more in line with how we lived our lives with our own children and how we lived our lives ourselves. So we started researching and just started learning more and more about the gut. And during that process, my husband's naturopath, we talked to him a lot about it. And he said, "Come into my office. You won't believe this, but we actually were just presented with the rights to buy these incredible strains out of London University from Dr. Simon Cutting, world-renowned probiotic researcher." And from there, it was just incredible. I mean, it's just, and we learned so, how important the gut was and how there were so many flaws in a lot of the probiotics on the market. And so from there is where Just Thrive was born. And it's literally been the most gratifying career journey I have ever been on, bar none.
When you're telling that story, one thing that really interests me is the fact that you talked about how the family was into natural health and alternative ways, but you're also you had one foot in the pharmaceutical industry. So I'm curious, back then, how far into natural health and wellness were you back when you were a lawyer and back when you were working for this other company?
Well, definitely not as far as I am right now, but always, I remember even when I was, about to have children, I was nursing, and that was a little bit more. Back in my day, I'd say that a lot of people were nursing, but there was still some resistance to it. And my mom she nursed all the kids, where there was definitely a resistance to it that we shouldn't be doing that. So my parents were both born in Europe, and we just ate very clean and didn't probably know it at the time. We always ate at home, and so I was just kind of I was just a part, that was just a part of who I was. And so I always tried to avoid antibiotics with my kids. I was more forward thinking, nowhere near as much as I am now. And I don't mean to say that pharmaceuticals, there's not a place for some pharmaceuticals. There is absolutely a place for pharmaceuticals, especially in emergency type medicine, especially in acute type of situations. But we just didn't feel like it was a place for chronic conditions. And back then, I remember letting my kids fever. I wouldn't, in the minute they got a fever, I wouldn't automatically give them ibuprofen. I would let their fever kind of run its course, unless it was dangerously high, of course. But I would let the fever run its course because that's our body's natural defense mechanism. It's our body's way of killing off an infection, an invader in there. So I was pretty involved, or pretty entrenched in it, but nowhere near to the extent I am today.
I hear you. And part of what brings a lot of people to this quote unquote extreme natural health world that you and I are part of is having a health crisis. So I'm curious, in researching before doing this interview, I didn't come across anything about, having a dip in your health that, was a catalyst to bring you to where you are today. But for you or your husband, is that part of the story at all?
It's actually not, and you're right. It's most people in this space have really um, they've had their own personal journey with health, and thank God I didn't. I think that a lot of times when people have those personal journeys, their mess becomes their message, and I think that's wonderful. We didn't have that. We saw it we saw it with relatives, like the one aunt I was talking about. We saw it with people in our community where they just had all of these health crises and they weren't getting to the root cause of it, and it was frustrating. The whole pharmaceutical model just became so frustrating to us after being in the industry for a while.
Let's jump back to the part of the story when your naturopath presents you with this opportunity to buy these strains of probiotics. First of all, how is something that's natural and something that's actually, within our anatomy, something that can be patented and sold like that?
Yeah. Well, it's all the delivery system. And it's the bottom line is the strains that are found in Just Thrive are these bacillus spores. And these spores were found off the land. And we could go into that in more detail later. The problem when they're in the land, when they're in the soil, they're dormant. They're not live microorganisms. When our ancestors used to eat off the land and eat that soil, they would get that bacteria. They would get those bacillus spore bacteria and they would swallow it, and then it would get to the intestines 100% alive. And it's not till they hit the intestines that they took their shell off and became live microorganisms. So what Dr. Simon Cutting did out of London University is he was able to to produce these strains that were isolated, from healthy humans. These are the same strains that were found in the soil. He's been able to produce them, multiply them, but keep them in spore form. The key is that you want them to be in a dormant state, have their endospore shell around themselves, and then you want them to get into the intestines and become alive. If you're going to manufacture these, they're going to become alive, and then they would die just like most other probiotics die before they ever get to the intestines. We'd have the same problem. What Dr. Simon Cutting did was allow those spores to stay in their dormant state. And that's the science behind the spores that we actually carry. So there can be spore-based probiotics out there, but they would die too if they become alive during the manufacturing process. These don't become alive during the manufacturing process.
And when it comes to probiotics, you have your classic type that you talked about there that can die before they get, to where they need to be. The spore base is the kind that you guys are producing. And then there's also soil based probiotics. So I'm curious, when people talk about soil based, is that the same thing that you guys are doing at Just Thrive?
No, we consider them very different categories. The where they start out, soil-based and spore-based probiotics are found in the soil. And that's why a lot of people will consider a spore-based probiotic a soil-based probiotic. We don't feel that they are because they both are found in the soil, but the difference is a soil-based organism is alive in the soil. A spore-based probiotic is dormant in the soil. So that's the biggest distinction. So a live soil-based organism, when you swallow it, will be killed off in the gastric system, just like most other probiotics will, because those are live organisms. The spore base are dormant in the soil. You swallow them, they're dormant. They're dormant all the way to the journey to the intestines. And it's not till they hit the intestines that they take their shell off and become alive. So that would be the biggest difference. So the category that is like 90% of the probiotics on the market, lactobacillus and bifidobacterium type of strains, are live microorganisms. And the big distinction is a probiotic doesn't need to be alive in the refrigerator at the store. Probiotic needs to be alive when it gets to the intestines. There's a lot of live microorganism has to go through to get to that journey to the intestines. Just from the logistics of the refrigerator from the store shelf to your car to your home, but then to actually get through the gastric system. The gastric system, the stomach, is meant to be the gastric barrier. It's very acidic. And those microorganisms, those bacteria, the probiotics, are almost always dying in the intestines. So most probiotics are actually just giving dead bacteria therapy, basically. So they're not really delivering live microorganisms. The very definition of a probiotic is to arrive alive in the intestines and confer a benefit onto the host. Most probiotics, both the lactobacillus bifidobacterium type of probiotics and the soil-based probiotics, don't meet that first part of the definition because they are killed off in the stomach acid. The spore-based probiotics get to the intestines 100% alive, and then they confer a benefit onto the host, which is the body.
And one thing you're alluding to, but I'll get a little more specific, is the fact that your probiotics, they don't have to be refrigerated. And with classical probiotics, there's a lot of trust involved. And I've thought about this before where you're trusting, the manufacturer to keep them at a temperature where they're going to stay alive, then in transportation, then at the supplement store where you're going to purchase them from. And there's just a lot of variables there where those might not be managed in a way that's going to keep them alive. Plus, now what we're learning from what you're saying now is that even if they are alive, they're gonna be killed off before they make it to the intestines.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I mean, I always laughed, in the beginning, it was like, you'd hear doctors saying, I was so happy that doctors were even talking about probiotic. I was like, okay, celebrate the small victories there. But they would always say, but make sure it's in the probiotic because it needs to be alive. And the biggest part of that they are missing is if it needs to be refrigerated in order to stay alive, how in the world would it ever survive your body temperature, which is much harder than the store shelf? These probiotics that are refrigerated can't even stand on the room temperature of the store shelf. How in the world would it ever survive your body temperature, which is 98.6, much less survive the gastric environment in the stomach? So it really never made any sense to us from the beginning.
Such a good point. And I'm curious, since, what you're bringing light to here is the fact that they are making it to the intestines, but they're not alive. And, these have been something people have been taking for, as long as I've been in this natural health space, years and
Mm.
years. You might know better than me how far that goes back. But what benefit are people getting then? Is there any benefit of those bacteria, even though they're not alive, making it to the intestines?
Yeah, there is some benefit actually. You do get some symptomatic relief. It's almost like taking something that's over the counter that's going to help out in the short term. So, because people will say to me, well, I've taken a probiotic and it worked. I mean, I felt better, and it may in fact do that. It may give it's dead bacteria therapy that is actually going to maybe make some shifts in the microbiome and do some good, but it's not making a true change in the microbiome. It's not getting to the root cause. It's just kind of giving some temporary relief. It's not actually shifting the microbiome to the way that we want it to be shifted, to have the beneficial bacteria outweigh the pathogenic bacteria.
So let's continue the story where the spore-based probiotic makes it to the intestine. It has that shell that's protected it through the stomach acid. What happens next?
So then it's really cool because these strains actually do something called quorum sensing, where the bacteria are reading the microbial environment. So they're reading your intestines. So they'll do something different in your intestines than they'll do in my intestines. And so they will read them. So they'll start to identify pathogenic bacteria. And if they notice some unfavorable bacteria, they actually have the ability to get rid of, they produce some antibiotics that actually help kill off pathogenic bacteria. On the flip side, they identify our beneficial bacteria that maybe has been stepped on and trampled on, beneficial bacteria that is not thriving in your gut. And these strains actually go in and start to help build the bacteria, to healthier levels. So it's actually making a shift in the gut. The other thing that these strains do when they get there is they colonize. So they stay in the intestines for about 21 to 28 days. They attach to the intestinal cell wall and they work through every part of the intestinal tract, where most probiotics will just pass through your intestines similar to the way food does. These strains will stay there for about 21 to 28 days, where they're working from the small intestine all the way down to the distal colon. And they're making a true change in the gut. One of the first studies we did was a survivability study showing that 99% of the probiotics on the market die off before they ever make it to the intestines alive. The other study that we found out, or that we did, was that we showed that these strains actually showed a 30% favorable shift in the gut just after 2 weeks of using this one particular strain in our product. So after 2 weeks, it showed a 30% favorable shift in the gut. I mean, we don't know of any probiotic that could show that profound of a result after 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks of taking the product. So it's actually going in there, reading the microbial environment, getting rid of the bad guys and helping bring the good guys back to life, and then attaching to the intestinal cell wall where it's working its way throughout the entire intestinal tract.
And you mentioned that they last in the gut for about a month. Obviously, it's something that people are going to want to take on an ongoing basis to keep that cascade going in a positive direction. But has there been any research showing, say, somebody decided to take them for a month or 6 months, stop taking them, and then look at the gut microbiome, say, a year later? I'm curious if there's any long-term changes, that this can cause that cascade to go that way.
Yeah, well, we haven't done research to see what happens when they stop. Only because the reason we don't encourage people to stop, you could go to a maintenance dose, maybe the normal dose is just one a day with food. It's super easy, but people might want to go to a maintenance dose of one every other day. The reason is that we're living in this entirely antimicrobial world. We know that we are 10 times more bacteria cells than we are human cells. So we are more bacteria than we are human. And yet, this world we live in is so disruptive to bacteria and microbes. Obviously, with antibacterial soaps and antibacterial, household products with antibiotics, all these things and we could go into that later too, but all these disruptors in our gut we're faced with on a daily basis. So we want to make sure we're maintaining, the gut integrity throughout, throughout our lifetime, really. So, but we haven't done it. We've done studies where we've seen that diversity has increased. The diversity of your strains has increased with the probiotic after being on it for a while. We've done studies to show other favorable benefits, but we haven't done a study of when someone stops the product.
And has there been any independent studies done on the product?
Well, all of them have been done by, uh, I should say, University of North Texas did our leaky gut study, and they've all been done. But yes, we have paid for them because nobody else is going to pay for them. So,
Got it. So let's talk about leaky
but I
gut.
will make, yeah, I will. I'm sorry to interrupt. I will mention that they have been published. I mean, in very, peer-reviewed journals, and our leaky gut study was published in the National Institutes of Gastroenterology publication. So these are all peer-reviewed journals that our studies have been published in.
Got it. You mentioned leaky gut there. Let's talk more about that. Somebody's experiencing leaky gut. If they take a product like what you guys are creating, what kind of changes can they expect?
Yeah, well, we've seen some pretty exciting changes with people with leaky gut. Leaky gut manifests itself in so many different ways. I mean, leaky gut is the cause of these autoimmune disease, allergies, but it's also the cause of anxiety, depression, heart disease. I mean, it could be tied to virtually any disease out there. I mean, really, 90% of non communicable diseases are attributed to the leakiness of the gut. So, what kind of changes people see is just overall improvement in their health. But we know that we did a double-blind human clinical trial on leaky gut. It was the first of its kind. It was done by University of North Texas. It took 100 college students. And here's what's so interesting just from the onset. They took 100 healthy college students that had no health issues, no health concerns. They weren't on any medication. They were presumably healthy. They found that 55% of them had a leaky gut and didn't even know it. And so this is kind of scary because now we know that leaky gut is the cause, the single biggest cause of all these chronic conditions that we're living with. And yet 55% of healthy college students had a leaky gut and didn't know it. So they're estimating that 80 to 90% of the adult population has a leaky gut and doesn't even know it. So they took, of this 55% of the college students, they divided those. Half of them took a placebo, half of them took spore-based probiotics. They sent them home. They gave them a challenge meal. They measured their LPS toxin level. So LPS toxins stand for lipopolysaccharides. These are toxins normally found in our gut. They measured their LPS toxins after this challenge meal, which was like a fast food type of a meal. They sent them home send them back to the dorm, and we all know what college students are doing to their guts and their bodies. And so half the group took the placebo, half the group took the spores. They came back after 30 days. They gave them a challenge meal. The placebo group saw a 30 or 42% increase. No, I'm sorry, I got that. 32% increase in their LPS toxins in the gut. The placebo group saw a 42% reduction in their LPS toxins in the gut. When we know we have a reduction in LPS toxins, that means those LPS toxins are no longer seeping into the bloodstream, thereby causing this inflammatory response by our immune system. So after 30 days, we saw inflammatory markers go down. We saw the ghrelin, the hunger hormone. We saw that there was more communication now between the gut and the brain. So it was pretty profound. We now see that just after 30 days, we saw this LPS toxins being drastically reduced. And the scary part about that is that the placebo group, it's like that drippy faucet. I mean, they were getting worse, dramatically worse. By 32%, they were getting worse after just 30 days of not taking care of their leakiness of the gut. So it's that drippy faucet where some people say, all of a sudden I have an autoimmune disease, or all of a sudden I have, anxiety or depression, or all of a sudden I have this condition, when really it was happening all along. This leakiness of the gut was happening all along and didn't know it. It was happening.
So just to make sure I have this right. So with that study, 32% decrease in LPS in the gut.
42% decrease in the gut
Got it. So,
from the treated group.
yes. So my question then is, LPS, when it's in the gut, is it an issue, or is it just an issue when it makes it into the bloodstream?
Yeah, it's not really problematic in the gut. You leave. It's just when those LPS toxins go into the bloodstream where it becomes problematic, and your immune system identifies as being an invader and starts to have this inflammatory response. But they're not really problematic in the gut.
Okay. So,
They're kind of part of the normal gut flora, because bacteria are dying off all the time, and this is just and LPS toxins are produced in the gut.
so the benefit then is there's less of them in the gut, so there's less of them having a chance to make it into the bloodstream.
The benefit is that they're not even that they're less in the gut, it's that they're not seeping into the bloodstream. That's the benefit. LPS toxins, we can't avoid them. They are being produced in the gut. I mean, it's a part of the bacteria die. The LPS toxins are produced by that. But they're just they're toxins that are just produced naturally in our gut. The biggest problem is when they seep into the bloodstream. That's when the immune system identifies it as an invader. It starts triggering this inflammatory response, and that's when all kinds of issues occur. And that's why people who have an autoimmune disease or allergies, it's 90% sure that they have a leaky gut, and that's the likely cause of it.
Okay. So just to make sure I understand this then, was there a measurement taken of how much of the LPS got into the bloodstream? Because the way I'm understanding it is they only measured the LPS that was, in the intestine. Do we have an idea of how, the control group versus the test group, do we know how much less in the test group the LPS made it into the bloodstream?
Well, in this placebo group, they had a 32% increase in the amount of LPS toxins that made it into the bloodstream. So if you weren't taking the spores, you now have 32% more than you had the 30 days before that. So they took the challenge meal. They had a level of LPS toxins that seeped into their bloodstream. When they took the 30 days later, after not taking the placebo, after not taking the spores, they saw a 32% reduction increase. I apologize. Let me say that over. They saw a 32% increase in LPS toxins after 30 days, where
Okay.
the treated group after 30 days saw a 42% reduction in the amount of LPS toxins that seeped into the bloodstream.
Into the bloodstream. Okay. So when we're talking
We're not measuring what's in the gut, we're measuring how much of the LPS toxins seeped into the bloodstream.
perfect. Just wanted to clarify that. Now I get it.
Okay.
So when we're talking about your average person, and I know, the average person has done a lot of damage to their gut, and I'm sure that's had a huge impact on the gut microbiome. But when we're talking about your average person these days, how many different strains of these microbes would they have in their gut?
You know, thousands and thousands of different types of strains. And then there's, trillions of different, of or microbiome or bacteria that were found in our gut. I mean, we have trillions of microbiome. And that's why we have 10 times more bacteria cells that are in and on us than we do human cells that are on us.
And this is where it becomes interesting, where not just your product, but a lot of the products out there, they only have a handful of different strains in the product. So when we're talking about, say, the spore probiotic that you guys are producing, when that makes it into the gut, and there are, you said, thousands of different strains, when we're only putting four in, how is that in a healthy way impacting the microbiome as a whole?
I'm so glad you asked that, Jesse, because I think this is what's so fascinating about the strains. Remember, I was talking about how the strains will do something different in your gut than they will do in my gut. These strains are so intelligent that they actually read the microbial environment, so they know what they need to do. They know the work they need to do. Whereas the other types of probiotics on the market, the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium type of strains, are like reseeding the gut. They're just trying to throw in a strain here and a strain there. And there's no way they could actually create this big garden. And that's why I love to use this garden analogy, because it really makes it crystal clear to people. If you envision a garden and the garden has been stepped on and trampled on, and there's weeds growing all over that garden, and you kind of compare that to your own gut. In your gut you have good bacteria, and then you have bad bacteria, and you've got the weeds that are all over. The pathogenic bacteria are represented by the weeds in the garden. So in that garden analogy, you take the traditional type of probiotics, you throw those in the garden. Most of them never will get there, but let's just say some get through that stomach acid. They get into that garden. They may plant a plant here and there. So they might make the garden look a little bit better, but they're not getting rid of the weeds in the garden. They're not attaching to the soil. They're not doing anything with those plants that have been stepped on and trampled on. Where the spores go in there, you throw the strains in there, they get there 100% alive. They attach to the soil in the garden, and then they have the ability to get rid of the weeds in the garden, and then they have the ability to actually bring those plants that have been stepped on and trampled on back to life. So they're helping, feed that whole garden. It's like the spores almost act like a gardener of the gut. They're going in, they're taking care of the whole garden, rather than taking a probiotic that has 4 strains and hoping you're going to put those all in. These strains are going in and reconditioning your gut. They're going in and building out this great garden to make it a diverse microbiome and make it a diverse garden, if you will.
That's a great analogy. And what do you think about fermented foods and how much of that good bacteria is making it through the stomach?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of fermented foods. I think they're really beneficial for your gut. What I will say is they don't replace a probiotic, because just like all these live organisms, even if a spore-based probiotic became alive before you swallowed it, it wouldn't survive the gastric system. So that's the same issue with fermented foods and things like that. But ferment, I'm a huge fan of fermented foods because we know the ferment is so rich in nutrients. It's good for our gut. So I'm a huge fan of them. I just don't think they replace a probiotic because of that same issue of survivability.
So we've talked quite a bit about, how these different probiotics that you guys are making make it down to the intestine, re-clean things up like gardeners. Why does that matter? Let's talk about when we get our gut in good shape, what that does for us as a whole.
Oh, it's amazing. I had mentioned about how virtually all disease is based on the health of our gut. I mean, we know our gut dictates virtually every aspect of our overall health. And so it's really important that we're taking care of our gut. And the problem is the world we live in is so offensive to our gut health. I mean, we know that, every non-communicable disease pretty much is associated with the imbalance in our gut. But yet every day we're doing these things that are so disruptive. When we could talk about um, antibiotics that we take, just antibiotics alone are so disruptive. Of course, antibiotics save lives, and on occasion people have to take them, but we just have to be aware that they are very disruptive to our gut health. We also know that antibiotics are found in our food supply, so we have to try to really eat clean in that respect. And then stress is a huge offender to our gut health. And people think that's so woo woo, but it's not. I mean, we know that there's a huge, the vagus nerve connects the brainstem to the gut. There's communications going back and forth. And if you're stressed out all the time, it disrupts your microbiome, which disrupts the communication between the gut and the brain. We know stress is a big offender, antibiotics is a big offender, household cleaning products is a big offender. We know, a lot of these, like I said, the antimicrobial things are everywhere we go, we're trying to kill microbes, yet our microbes are so important for us, for our immune health, for all aspects of our overall health. So, it's just unfortunate that the food, and one of the most important disruptors is our food supply. We know glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, is so disruptive to our gut. Antibiotics are so disruptive to our gut because they kill off the good bacteria as well as killing off the bad bacteria. But glyphosate actually only targets the beneficial bacteria. So they're even worse than antibiotics because they're only targeting the beneficial bacteria. So it's really, really, it's what I say is just foundational for our health. I mean, if we're going to do anything for our health, we need to first start with our gut microbiome. And I can't overstate that enough.
No, that makes sense. And I wasn't aware of that piece about the glyphosate only attacking the good bacteria. Fascinating.
Yeah, fascinating. It's just mind blowing to me that this is sprayed all over our food supply. It's absolutely mind blowing that, and we just accept it the way it is, and we see, I mean, we see what it's done to people. I mean, there was a study. We speak at some autism conferences once in a while, and we've seen, the rise in autism at the kids on the spectrum just from since there was like a direct correlation between the rise in autism and the introduction of glyphosate in our food supply. So there's a lot of correlation out there between some chronic diseases and glyphosate, and it all traces back to your gut, because your gut, like we've said, is responsible for all these aspects of our health.
So we've talked about how to get our gut back in good shape. Let's talk about it now from a maintenance perspective and how we go about feeding those bacteria once we have that back, in good shape again.
Yeah. Well, there's lots of things that we could do to support our gut health. We could start by eating clean, which is something that I always talk about because of what I just said about the glyphosate issue. We really want to eat as organic as possible. Obviously, not eat processed foods. Our diet really does make a difference. Avoiding sugar, alcohol. Sorry for those of you who are listening, but we have to be careful about all of those things that are very disruptive to our gut and be more mindful of it. I also think mindful practice, now that I mentioned that, is really important. Meditation, deep breathing, whatever it is that makes you calmer will really support your gut health, because your brain will send signals to your gut. Um, and then another big tip and trick is intermittent fasting. We know that intermittent fasting actually increases diversity in your gut microbiome. We know that having a diverse microbiome is really, really important. I mean, all experts agree that having diversity in your microbiome is a healthy microbiome. And we know that the intermittent fasting really does support the diversity in the gut microbiome.
That's
Another
so
way
interesting.
to,
Let's talk more about that before we move on.
sure.
So it's really interesting because at that point, obviously, we're not putting any food in there for the bacteria, the healthy bacteria, to continue to grow and thrive. How does, cutting them off from food and giving digestion a break cause that diversity to spike?
Well, one of the reasons is that there are certain microbes that actually proliferate more in the present without food, with no food in the presence of the gut. So we know that there are certain microbes that actually do better with no food. So the fasting allows those microorganisms to proliferate in the gut at that time. It also increases the production of growth hormones. It induces autophagy, all of these really important things to help support the gut health. So, intermittent fasting is a really important tool to supporting our gut health.
Do you have any data on doing longer term fasts when the bacteria in the gut go for, days or even weeks when people are doing like long term water fasting? How does that change the microbiome?
Yeah, no, we haven't done any studies on long-term fasting. So I'd be interested too, because I am really intrigued by that. I know a lot of friends of ours who do a lot of the long-term fasting, and I'm very intrigued to see how that would affect the microbiome. I would imagine it would just continue to increase the diversity because, we know that, like I said, there are some microbes that actually work better without food in the system.
And what about the ketogenic diet? Because that's a diet that's lacking, traditionally, it depends how you do keto, but the traditional keto diet doesn't have as much fiber to feed the good bacteria. So have you seen any research on people doing that long term and how that impacts the gut microbiome?
We haven't done any research on the ketogenic diet specifically, but one of the things I was about to say next was when we were done talking about the intermittent fasting is that diversity of foods. I know that there's people who are on the ketogenic diet, people on paleo, people are vegan, and we are more of the opinion that it's more important to feed your body a diverse group of foods. So we're very much into food restriction, but really we feel like we should be more into opening different types of foods, like going to ethnic grocery stores and grabbing roots and tubers that you don't normally eat. Our ancestors used to eat 600 plus foods a year, and now we're only eating 20 types of foods, a year. I think the late one study I saw was like 20 different types of foods a year versus the 600 that our ancestors used to eat. So we're more of the mindset that we need to increase diversity by eating a diverse group of microbiome or microbes by eating a diverse group of foods.
So the
And
way
one of
that
the
would
easiest, I'm sorry, one of the easiest ways to produce that is to, you know, go to different grocery stores and try to really be conscious about introducing a new food into your system and continuing to take that food, eat that food for a couple, months. So you're really letting it plant into your gut.
So we've talked about intermittent fasting, we've talked about these spore probiotics that you guys have brought on the scene. What are some of the other things that we can do from a lifestyle perspective? We talked about stress reduction as well to facilitate good gut health.
Yeah, I think the lifestyle can't be, underestimated. I mean, it's so important that I know myself, building our business, it was stressful. I have 3 kids, they're all in sports. It was super busy and I'm building this business and I was stressed. I was super, super stressed. And it's like I just finally took it, I'm like, I am preaching to the choir about gut health. And yet I know I'm doing something so disruptive to my health. So I just started, doing a lot of deep breathing and intermittent fat or and meditation and working out is really important because for me personally, it's my drug of choice. Just going and for outside walk, being in nature is really important as far as lifestyle. Again, if you're going out for a hike and you're in a more of a rural area and you're able to touch the ground and you've got you're hiking and you're touching the ground and you go to eat your sandwich, don't wash your hands. Don't take a hand wipe or hand sanitizer and wash your hands. Eat the dirt off of the land, especially if it's clean. Obviously, most of the dirt that we have in our backyards is contaminated and the world we live in. But if you go to true nature, spend more time in nature and don't be washing your hands all the time. And but really, spending time in nature is really beneficial to our gut health too, and just having a more calm lifestyle. And there's so many other benefits to that, anyway.
What's it been like working with your husband? You mentioned earlier you guys were, after you were a lawyer, you worked in pharmaceuticals and you guys did that as a team. and now just Thrive, you guys co-founded as a team. So talk about how that's been.
It's been awesome, actually. We've always had a great marriage. I've been very blessed. 28 years we've been married, and it honestly just gets better and better. And I know people are like so skeptical when I say that, but it's been a great ride. And I think building a business together has made it really even stronger because at the end of the day, we are doing this to impact lives, and it's really fun to impact lives together as a team. And there have been times during, building the business where it's like we've got to turn it off. Like we can't be talking about just Thrive. It became so consuming to us, and but it really has been great. We have different roles. I'm more of the face of the brand. I'm more involved in the day-to-day business. He's Max, kind of in the background. Every morning we have coffee and we're talking about it and just strategizing on different things and looking at new research. He's more of like he'll research different ideas, different products that maybe we want to bring. One of the big things that we've committed to is only bringing products that are missing and needed in the market. So we love vitamin C, we love vitamin D, we love certain other nutrients out there, but we're not going to bring those products to the market if they're already out there being done well by other brands. We're really looking to bring things that are different and missing in the market. And he's really good about identifying those types of products that are out there and being my sounding board. So yeah, it's been really, really good. Thank God. It's really fun to do things that when you're impacting lives and making a difference in the world and doing it together.
Well, speaking of your products, another one that I really love is the K2. And I think more and more in the last number of years, it's become brought to light in the health and wellness space. But I still think it's one that not a lot of people are taking on a regular basis and understanding the benefits of it. So I'd love for you to talk about that and why K2 is so important to get in on a regular basis.
Yeah, well, vitamin K2 is such an important nutrient, and it baffles me that people aren't talking about it more. The job of vitamin K2 is so profound. It directs calcium away from the arteries and the soft tissue where we don't want it and puts it into the bone where we do want it. It's like the police of our calcium. It tells our calcium what to do. And yet, no one's really talking about it. And people are taking calcium but they're not taking K2 with it. It's mind blowing because the calcium doesn't know where to go. So there are so many profound studies, not that we did, but profound studies of the Rotterdam study out there. They took about 4,000 patients over a 10-year period of time, men and women, and supplemented them with 45 micrograms of vitamin K2. Saw a 50% reduction in arterial calcification, a 50% reduction in heart disease. Here's what was profound, a 25% reduction in all-cause mortality. So 25% reduction from dying from any cause just by supplementing with 45 micrograms of vitamin K2. It is really an incredible compound. There's studies on vitamin K2 on cancer, on nerve health and brain health, and it's really quite profound. And bone health is super important. We've seen there's a study out there with osteoporosis on vitamin K2 and the dramatic difference it makes with people with osteoporosis because it's literally directing calcium into the bone, which is super important. And now with everyone taking vitamin D, you could have you want to take vitamin D, but you need to be taking the vitamin K2 with the vitamin D. They're both fat soluble vitamins and work beautifully together.
And I want to highlight too, a lot of people know about vitamin K or vitamin K1, which people can get from eating, their fruits and vegetables. And that isn't the same thing. That can, it's classically known to help with clotting and it's important as well. But what we're talking about here is a totally different thing.
Totally different thing, right? It's like the vitamin K1 is what you get from your leafy greens and all of that. We're not getting, and that's another point. So I'm glad you brought that up because vitamin K2, we just don't find that in our food supply in Western, in the Western world. We're not finding vitamin K2. You find it in organ meats, and unfortunately, people aren't eating organ meats a lot these days. You find it in some fermented cheeses in Northern Europe, but we're not really finding vitamin K2 in our diet anywhere. We just can't. You could try to eat as diverse of a group as you can of foods, but you're not really finding it in your diet. So it's really important that we supplement with vitamin K2.
Earlier, we talked about glyphosate and why it's so important to eat a diet that you're not consuming that. I'm curious, let's talk about your diet. Somebody who is in the know when it comes to gut health, and I'd love to know what that looks like, how it's evolved over the years, and specific things that you're taking in on a regular basis to maintain your gut health.
Yeah. So I'm a huge egg person. I eat eggs every single day. So I will generally, if I have like meat, like some type of, organic chicken or whatever I have left over from the night before, whether it's, well, if I have salmon left over, I'm not going to put that in my eggs, but whatever type of meat protein I have left over from the night before, I usually cut that up and I cut up onions and some red peppers, broccoli, whatever type of vegetables I have. It is quite a production that I do every day. But because I don't eat breakfast, it's kind of nice because I don't, I eat this egg mixture at, noon usually. So I have, I cut those, all the veggies up and some protein, and I have eggs. And then I take a piece of Ezekiel toast and I toast a piece of Ezekiel bread and I put some avocado on it. And that's what I usually eat almost every day. And so I know, and I keep telling myself I need to diversify my diet a little bit more, but I do try to do that with some of the vegetables that I'm bringing in. So, and then at night, we make, salmon, chicken, grass-fed beef. I have subscriptions to different groups out there. And so I'm trying to just keep that grass-fed meat in my freezer at all times. And then I usually do a vegetable and a big, huge green salad. It's a little boring. We do a lot of the same things pretty often. Try to dice it up a little bit.
You mentioned Ezekiel bread there, and I don't believe that's gluten free. So I'm curious, is gluten
Yeah.
something you try and avoid, or is it
Yeah,
something that you don't worry about?
that's I was as I was telling you that, I was about to preface it, like that's kind of like my guilty pleasure is my Ezekiel, because it is not gluten free. It's very low in the glycemic index, but I've never had an issue with gluten. But I do know that even if you don't have an issue with gluten, it is disruptive to your gut lining. So I definitely try to avoid it at all costs, except that I do my little low glycemic Ezekiel bread in the morning. But we know gluten is really disruptive, no matter what, whether you have an intolerance to it or you have celiac, or if you don't have any intolerance, it is disruptive. We know there was a study that we did that showed that it's very disruptive. Not that we did, the study that was done that actually showed, it's causing leaky gut. So we know that we do not want to consume gluten.
Earlier, you quickly
But
touched on
I'm sorry, personally, I don't have any issues with gluten that I know of, but I do know that it would be affecting my gut lining.
Earlier, you quickly touched on alcohol and alluded to the fact that it's not good for gut health. Can we talk about the specifics? Are there any types of alcohol for people out there that want to have an occasional drink that are easier on the gut, or is it just a disaster all around?
Listen, Jesse, I'm trying to figure that out myself. I know that when I do drink alcohol, I usually drink dry farm wines because it has no sugar in it. And I really try to stay away from sugar as much as possible. I know it's a very clean wine. And so I try to focus on that. But I've always often wondered that about tequila. I know people are talking about tequila being better for a lot of reasons, but I'm not aware of any research. But now you've just motivated me to start doing some research on this.
What are your thoughts on the skin microbiome? We've talked about, taking these spore-biotics and rebuilding the gut microbiome, but our skin has a microbiome as well. I'm curious if there's anything you do specifically to maintain that, especially, things like there's especially in today's world so much hand sanitizer out there and antibacterial soaps when you're out and about. And is there certain things you do to maintain that healthy skin microbiome?
Yeah, I really try to use clean products as much as possible. I'm really careful about personal care products because we know that they're very disruptive to, when we start putting all of these chemicals on our skin, it's affecting our microbiome, including the bacteria that are in our gut. So I often think if I can't pour it into a plant, then I shouldn't be putting it on my body. So I'm not going to be putting Vaseline intensive care all over in my plants. So I'm certainly not going to put it on my body. So I really try to be as, research products that I find are clean and better for us. And I've started to do that with toothpaste. I've started to do that with a lot of my household care products. But the skin microbiome, I'm so glad you brought that up because it is really, really important, and people have to start understanding that. I feel that way about sunscreens. I feel like sunscreens are so disruptive to our body, and I think getting in the sun is good for us. It's not the villain that people have made it become. I think we have to be careful about it. We shouldn't burn, but being out in the sun is really beneficial to our skin microbiome. It's also just beneficial to our health. And I also think that the skin microbiome, we should just be protecting it the same way we protect things that go inside of our mouth. Because like you said, our microbiome is made up of the microorganisms that are not only in us, but living on us, on our skin. And people will often find, they have rashes, they have skin rashes, and they're putting all this topical stuff on. And, we know that when you have a skin rash, it's a reflection of what's going on in your gut. So they're all very tied to each other.
What you alluded to there, I'd love for you to expand on if you have any info on maintaining a healthy gut and how that actually can impact the microbiome on the skin.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because these microbes are communicating with each other all the time. So our even when it comes to like, I mean, the lung microbiome, the brain, the lung, gut, brain access, all of these, the skin and the microbiome, they're all connected with each other and they're all speaking to each other all the time. So we really want to make sure that we're taking care of our gut microbiome to make our skin look better, our skin feel better, and be healthier on the outside, because they're talking to each other all the time.
So earlier we pretty much dispelled any benefits from traditional probiotics, but I want to talk about CFUs because when you go to the health food store and you go to the fridge and start looking at these probiotics, it almost seems like a war going on whoever can get the most CFUs into the product, however many billion. What are your thoughts on CFUs?
I my thoughts are it's really a marketing tool at this point. And like you said, we see probiotics that have 50 billion CFUs. You see probiotics that have 100 billion CFUs. You see some that have 250 billion CFUs. I mean, there's no cap to it anymore. And a part of me started, being, coming from a good place, is a lot of these companies knew that these probiotics were dying. So they're putting all these extra in to maybe, hopefully, some of them, if we put in 50 billion, maybe some will survive. We put 250 billion, maybe some will survive. Well, the study that we did, the survivability study, took a probiotic that had 50 billion CFUs and died off. 99% of those died off by the time they got into the intestines. So there is no research that more is better. No research at all that says having a probiotic with 250 billion is better than 10 billion CFUs. What we need to focus on is the shift it's making in the microbiome. I mean, our product only has 3 billion CFUs, and yet we know that after 2.5 weeks, these strains showed a 30% favorable shift in the microbiome. Where those are, you could have 250 billion CFUs and it makes no shift in the microbiome. And so there's really no relevance to the amount of CFUs in there. Having more is not better. It really has become a marketing tool, unfortunately, for a lot of brands. And it's the way it is these days. More is better. And really, in this case, it's meaningless how many CFUs that are in a product.
I'm still so baffled by the fact that, there's so many of these probiotics that are in the refrigerator at the health food store and oftentimes health experts, if they're rattling off maybe five different supplements they recommend, usually probiotics is within that realm. So I'm just curious, like, do you feel like information is starting to trickle through and people are starting to become more aware because of products like yours and because of the research?
So about 10 to 12 years ago, the Human Microbiome Project was launched by the National Institutes of Health. And that study told us more about the gut than we ever knew before. And I think there was such a surge of popularity in probiotics and gut health and how we need to really be focusing on our gut health. And so that was where I think there was this, influx of information, and people are starting to talk about it more. So it's been really exciting for me, even if somebody isn't taking Just Thrive. I just love that people are going to a probiotic. I love that people are starting to get empowered and take care of their own health, and find out that the gut is actually really, really important to our overall health. And I think that that's where we need to be focusing on right now. People will always ask me, well, what about this probiotic? And don't you get mad about this? And I'm like, no, I just want people to be talking about gut health again. I want people to be talking about gut health and its importance in our overall health. And so I'm excited to see this resurgence. I'm excited to know doctors are talking about it, even if they're telling you to take ones that are in the refrigerator. I just want to see people talking about it, and they start getting into a bigger conversation about gut health in general.
So let's take an example here, a hypothetical one, where somebody is in a situation where they need to take antibiotics and they're, aware of maintaining their gut health beforehand. They've already listened to us talk here today. What's the best thing they can do beforehand, during, and after to, minimize any negative effect of the antibiotics on their good microbiome and to repopulate that afterwards?
Yeah, great question. All the things that I just mentioned, of course, to be doing the mindfulness, the avoiding other types of glyphosates and that kind of stuff. All those things, walking, being in nature, all those things are really important. But with the antibiotic, it's really important to be taking a spore-based probiotic. The reason is that the spores actually will survive the presence of an antibiotic. Most probiotics would be destroyed by the presence of an antibiotic. You've heard doctors say, when you're done with your antibiotic, take a probiotic. But no, in our case, we've studied these with some of the strongest antibiotics out there, showing that these spores actually maintain their integrity in the presence of an antibiotic. So during that time, I would say that people should take two of the probiotic. Normally it's just one a day, but I would say to take two at the same time, and while you're on an antibiotic. And then after, I would take two for another good couple weeks. I mean, probably up to a month after stopping your antibiotic, because there are studies that show a single course of clindamycin actually wreaked havoc on your gut for over a year period of time. So we know that those antibiotics are not just destroying your gut bacteria while you're taking them, but that those effects last for months on end. So really important to be taking a spore-based probiotic to support your gut while you're taking an antibiotic, as well as after taking an antibiotic.
And before you mentioned for an adult, the daily dose of your product would be one capsule a day. Let's talk about kids. When can they start taking it and how much would they take?
Yeah, I love that you talked about kids, because I'm so passionate about kids. I know when I was a kid, which was eons ago, there was one kid in my whole group, that in our whole school, and I went to a large high school, that had a peanut allergy. I mean, I didn't know anybody that had allergies. Now we know we have peanut free tables. Kids are, there's so many children that have allergies, asthma, they have all kinds of issues, and we didn't see this before. So our children's guts are being, they're born into this sterile environment. We're getting rid of bacteria. And I'm really, really passionate about taking care of our kids' gut health. And so for kids, you could open the capsule and mix it with food if they can't swallow it. Really important to be giving it to them, because kids are, faced with all these challenges. They didn't have glyphosate, or we didn't have glyphosates. I didn't have glyphosates when I was growing up, but these kids are born into it. They're getting attacked by all ends. So we really want to make sure that you just have them take one a day with food. You could do a half a capsule if for cost savings, maybe for some of the kids, but you could open the capsules, mix it with food. It's tasteless, colorless, odorless. They would never know it's there. You could even bake with these strains. We did a study that showed you could bake with them up to 455 degrees. If a child isn't, a baby, you could always, like, if a mother is even nursing, and you could always sprinkle some on the breast, and like the child could get some. You could put some on your finger and let the baby suck on it if they wanted to. But these strains are so beneficial for children, especially because of the world they're living in.
So even kids that are, like a month old, like there's no age restriction here.
Yeah, I
Even
mean,
babies can take them.
Yeah, I mean, on our label, we don't say that because it's, we can't really, there's choking hazards with the capsules and things like that. But these strains are so great we've been trying to launch a liquid formula, but we just can't get around, like the manufacturing process has been really difficult to keep them in spore form, as well as keep them where they're not a disgusting taste for people, for the kids and things like that. So, but hopefully we've been working on this for years, trying to get something because we want this for kids. But the nice thing is just the powder alone would be so beneficial. You could, like I said, you could sprinkle it on your finger and then give it to the baby if they wanted to.
And I'd imagine for babies who are born via C-section, this would be even more important as they get a lot
Yes.
of that good bacteria passing through the vagina when they're being born. In this case, this might be another option for mothers.
Yes, exactly. It would be really important for a C-section because we know the only time we're actually inoculated with lactobacillus and bifidobacterium is during vaginal childbirth, close skin to skin contact at birth, and breastfeeding. So we never got like lactobacillus and bifidobacterium from the soil or the land. We only were inoculated that during vaginal childbirth. And we know that it's the mother's microbiome that is passing on to her unborn child. So we really want to take care of a pregnant mom's microbiome. That's so critically important because the mom is passing on the microbiome to the child. And that's super important to remember. And, as parents, as mothers, I know like all you want to do is the most important, to help your children out, to really take care of your child and have them in the healthiest situation. And in order to do that, you, as a mom, you need to take care of your own microbiome.
So when it comes to the Just Thrive probiotics, mothers can take them while they're breastfeeding, while they're pregnant.
Yes, I mean they're, as far as we know, they're completely safe. There's no contraindications or anything like that. We always, with a pregnant mom, tell them to ask their doctor if it's okay to take a probiotic, and I would imagine 99% of them would say that it would be fine to take a probiotic. But every pregnancy is different, so I just want to make sure I mention that. And that goes with the babies too. If there's a newborn baby that's having some gastrointestinal issues and they want to make sure, speak to your doctor about it, but because every situation is different, but it's always super important to be supporting the gut microbiome at an early age, and as well as when a mom is pregnant.
And we've been really lucky with both our young kids. They were born vaginally, so we hadn't had to go this route. But I want to throw this
Yes.
out there for mothers that maybe need to, there's a lot of reasons why mothers need to have a C-section. Some mothers even do it by choice. That I've heard a good practice would be to swab the mother's vagina after the baby's born, and you can actually rub that on the baby's skin to inoculate the baby that way. You mentioned breast milk as well. And I've even heard of some mothers taking that whatever, cloth or whatever they're using to inoculate from the vagina to the baby. You can put that in the baby's mouth as well. So just something for people to look into if they're in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I say that all the time. Definitely. There are ways to get around it because, yes, mothers have to, deliver by C-section all the time for reasons, that are beyond their control.
So let's talk about pets. We have a dog who's an Australian Shepherd who's 6 years old, and she was our first baby, and we treat her like another member of the family. We love her so much, and we do everything we can to make her health as optimal as possible and make her thrive. And
Hmm.
part of what we do is give her a probiotic. So let's talk about I guess a lot of what you said about traditional probiotics will apply to the probiotics that are traditionally sold for pets. So let's talk about other options there.
Yeah. So the probiotic that we actually did a study on leaky gut in dogs. Dogs have a leaky gut the same way humans have leaky guts. And, dogs are even more susceptible to this because they're out in their, in the grass, and it's sprayed with glyphosate, sprayed with Roundup, and they're having a lot of issues. And, we're seeing dogs with lots of GI infections. We're seeing, diarrhea, changes in their appetite, different sleeping difficulties. I mean, there's a lot of issues that dogs have that are really, you know, stem from the leakiness of the gut. And so we did actually a study on leaky gut with dogs and showed that, these spores are actually helping, resolve the issue with leaky gut for dogs as well. So it's really important that we're taking care of our dog's gut health too. I know people are so, like you said, people treat their pets like they're a member of their family. And just like we take care of our kids and ourselves, we need to be taking care of our dog's gut health as well.
And your product that is created for
Mhm.
people to use with their dogs, can they use that with cats as well, or is the microbiome too different?
Yeah, no, they definitely could use it with cats as well. We just, the study was done on dogs, which is why we talk about dogs, but it would be great for cats. In fact, before we launched the product, people were like, "Can I give the probiotic to our dog?" And we're like, "Absolutely, open the capsule, mix it with, the regular probiotic and antioxidant piece." And but they could definitely give the product to cats as well, the dog product to cats.
And I noticed in the ingredient list, I think there's some, is it grass fed, some kind of grass fed meat or some kind of organ meats in there as well?
Yeah, the beef liver. That's why it's like it was not coming to me. The grass-fed beef liver. Yep, exactly.
And there is an additional probiotic strain in there as well. I'm curious why the addition.
Well, because there's research on lichen formis with animals in general, so that's why and specifically to leakiness of the gut. So we added that too. So we really wanted to make this dog focused, animal focused.
And if somebody wanted to get that additional strain and get some of the benefits from the beef liver, could a human take that one too? Or
Yep, I know. I know some people that do it. Yep.
awesome. Well, Tina, I really appreciate this conversation. We went really deep on gut health, probiotics, and brought a lot of new information to light for myself and I'm sure for the listeners as well. So I want to thank you. And I know you're offering a 15% discount to the listeners if they want to try your products. And we're going to put the details in the show notes how they can take advantage of that incredible deal. I think the code is Ultimate Health. And again, we're going
Yep.
to link everything up in the show notes. So I just want to thank you so much for doing the work you do, being so passionate about this work. It shows in having this conversation, and yeah, just keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Jesse. Keep doing what you're doing too. I love that you're empowering the world right now. So great job.
Thank you for being a part of it. And other than listeners taking advantage of the discount at Just Thrive, how can they connect with you after the show?
The best way is just to go to justthrivehealth.com. That's our website, or you could go to Instagram at Just Thrive Health also. So, or Facebook, Just Thrive Health. So easy to find us.
Awesome. Thanks again, Tina. I appreciate everything.
Thank you, Jesse.